So while we were out looking at golden spikes, we found something else.
We did.
So look what we found while we were out screwing around. There used to be a really neat old display about the golden spike here at the Utah State Capitol building. It was there when we were kids, and we wanted to see if it was still there. Well, it's not. It's over here. They took it out years and years ago, and then they gave it to the Daughters of Utah Pioneers, who moved the whole display into their museum, which is right across the street from the state capitol building. Now, when we were kids, this really blew our minds. It's a really neat display. They've got some track here showing the different rail sizes that were used on the Transcontinental Railroad versus what's used today. And they have some really neat Lionel trains and some Chinaware off of dining cars and so on. But as adults, it seems pretty sort of, well, dare I say, unremarkable. Now, we were told that this pedestal contained the actual golden spike, and we all believed this to be the true one and only golden spike. And now that we've seen the actual golden spike, well, this is a recreation, a pretty decent recreation, but clearly a replica. So while it's fun to revisit our childhood, nothing here is really that remarkable. But while most of the things in the room are sort of garden variety, there's this sign sitting here that is the sign from the Central Pacific Railroad documenting 10 miles of track laid in one day on April 28, 1869. And that begs the question of how did it find its way here? Could this be the original sign, or just what is this sign? Where did it come from? Okay, let's start by talking about why they laid 10 miles of track in one day and how they were able to do that. This is the Central Pacific Track Lane Camp. They actually put everything in one place and totally geared up in order to lay 10 miles of track in one day. They referred to this place as Camp Victory. It seems that some officers of the Central Pacific had entered into a $10,000 bet with some guys at the Union Pacific, saying that they could best their track laying record of, I think it was 8 miles, and lay 10 miles of track on a normal work day. Their system worked like this. They would lay the ties onto the finished grade, loading those off of wagons, and then bring a flat car loaded with rail up to the very end of track. Then men would grab 2 rails, take those forward, set them on the ties, and then they'd roll this contraption here out onto the rails, and that would hold everything engaged while it was spiked. Now, their plan was to execute this feat on April 27th, and on the morning of April 27th, they had one of the locomotives derail, and they realized there was no way that they would be able to complete the task, so they decided to put the whole thing off until April 28th. Now, according to legend, once they finished the 10 miles of track, they planted this sign to document their accomplishment. Now, this is the oldest photograph that anybody knows of, and it can't be all that old because if you notice over here, there are electrical power lines. So that pretty much means that this photograph was taken in the 20th century. The sign appears to be in pretty good shape for something that had already been there for 30 years. And so it makes sense that this sign was actually put up later, probably much later. Also, it says April 28th, and if they'd prepared the sign ahead of time, well, it would have said April 27th, because that was the day they planned on doing this. The area around the sign almost looks like it had just barely been put up, and possibly this photograph was taken to document that. However, if you look very, very closely, there's already some damage to the sign. It appears that something, probably a bird, has pecked a hole in the sign. Now, all of the various creations and recreations of the sign are built the same way, and that's that it has a front and back with a hollow space in the middle, and then the front and back are mounted in a frame. So this birdie would have found himself in a lovely little apartment inside there. Now here we see the sign that's on display at the Golden Spike National Historic Site. It was donated by someone who'd laid hands on it at some point in time. Nobody quite knows its history. It just ended up in somebody's private collection. And the assumption has always been that this is the original sign. But notice there's no hole in it. But nobody knows for certain because there's been a whole series of signs put up. In fact, there's one up there right now, which is clearly a recreation. In fact, it was put up by the park rangers at the Golden Spike National Historic Site to mark the place where this fabulous feat took place. Fortunately, the location is well documented. Now here we see yet another old photograph of the sign. Some people assume this to be older than the one we looked at, but that just can't possibly be the case. You'll notice the power lines are still there. And this is clearly a different sign because, well, it doesn't have a hole in it. It does show some other damage. There's part of the top of the sign missing, and the date is very, very faded. Notice also that in this picture, the track is really, really well maintained. This was the Central Pacific and later the Southern Pacific's main line through Utah, and so it would have been very well cared for. The weeds have been all burned back in an effort to keep the tracks clear. This was the main line until 1909, when the Lucin Cutoff opened, a bridge right through the middle of the Great Salt Lake, at which time this line became a secondary line and really wasn't used much at all. So it's easy to assume that this photograph is after the Lucin Cutoff was built because, well, the tracks are all overgrown and not very well maintained. Now the sign, as we mentioned, has been freshly relettered, but for some reason they didn't reletter the date. Now, if we look at the sign in the visitor center at the Golden Spike site, well, it's exactly like that. It's got fresher paint on the main lettering, and the date is faded. Now, here's another photograph, and we actually know the date for this one because this photo ran in the Ogden Standard Examiner in 1941, announcing that the rails were going to be pulled up for the war effort. Now, the date is really crisp on this sign, but newspapers were notorious for retouching photographs, so that's probably all that is. Now, I found another old photograph showing a locomotive out there. Clearly the same sign, it's got the damage at the top and the faded lettering. So this must have been a second sign put up to replace the other one when the other one just flat fell apart. Well, back at the museum, this has got to be that first sign, because look, the birdie hole is there.
It is.
And the construction here seems to be of a really, really early type.
Look at the square nails.
Yeah. So in this photograph, which seems to be the oldest known photograph, this has got to be that same sign.
Yeah, there looks like it.
Yeah, and judging from the condition, it had been out there a long time before it was pulled out, somewhere around 1910 or so, to make all these dates line up. And it was replaced with the sign that's now at Promontory in the museum. So tens of thousands of people will be coming to Utah in May, drawn principally by this machine here, the Big Boy.
Wow.
It's being restored right now, and it's going to be rolled out, as it were, on May 10th, 2019 for the 150th anniversary of the driving of the Golden Spike.
While folks are in the area, they'll want to visit Promontory Summit and also be sure and see the Golden Spikes.
Yeah, we just need to figure out where the golden spikes are going to be.
That's right.
Because right now they're at the University of Utah, and the plan is to remove them from there and take them up to the Utah State Capitol building. So it's entirely possible that while people are in town, they'll be seeing the spikes on display here at the State Capitol building, or they may still be at the University of Utah because a whole discussion has ensued about moving them up here and whether that would be secure and whatnot.
Visit the state capitol anyway.
Well, yeah, because it's an absolutely beautiful building.
It is.
And we now know that the 10-mile sign is on display right across the street in the Daughters of Utah Pioneers Museum. And that's pretty neat to see anyway. Well, if you haven't been over to the channel, and if you haven't binge watched for several hours at a time, do get over to the channel and binge watch. And if you're not a subscriber, here's your opportunity to click the blue button.
Woohoo!
Here it comes.
Doink.
Well, we're not sure how you found us finding what we found, but we hope you didn't find it boring. And we will see you here on Sunday with the Driving Around Show. See you then. Bye-bye.